Jeffrey Mark Deskovic was wrongly convicted in 1990 at the age of 17 of raping, beating, and strangling Angela Correa, who was a 15-year-old high school student, classmate at Peekskill High School. On December 7th, 1990, a jury convicted him based on testimony from Peekskill Police Detective Daniel Stevens, our good friend who supervised Castaldo, that Deskovic had confessed to a crime. Deskovic proclaimed his innocence on numerous occasions after his conviction. He was repeatedly denied a reopening of the case by then District Attorney Jeanine Pirro of Fox News fame. Since at least 2000, Deskovic also appealed to DA Pirro to run DNA testing to help prove his innocence. She declined. Ultimately, it was allowed by then District Attorney Janet DiFiore, who is now the Chief Judge of the State of New York, who authorized a DNA test and led to his exoneration. The DNA from the crime scene was matched to a gentleman named Stephen Cunningham. Jeffrey Deskovic is now in law school. He's getting his law degree, God willing. He posts the time when he's taking exams on Facebook, so we could all wish him good luck. And he won a multi-million-dollar lawsuit against the Putnam County, and with that money, he founded the Jeffrey Deskovic Foundation for Justice. Jeffrey, come on up.
Good evening. Good evening. All right, great. Some energy in the room. It's great to be out. It's kind of surreal to be here. It's when you lose freedom, you appreciate the small things. So I appreciate the freedom of movement, of just meeting new people, socializing, fresh air, the sun. No oversight. I don't have to have a pass if I go someplace. So I really have that appreciation of new things, of things that most of us, including myself, took for granted, prior to my mishap in losing my freedom. So as Mark Baker mentioned, I served 16 years in prison. I was arrested when I was 16 in Peekskill, which is maybe about 40 minutes from here. I was charged with a murder and rape, which I did not commit. I turned 17 by the time the trial rolled around, and I was wrongfully convicted despite a pre-trial negative DNA test, which showed that semen found in the victim did not match me. But rather than acknowledge they made a mistake, they instead continued to prosecute me full speed ahead. The arrest and conviction was based on a coerced false confession. I was driven from Peekskill, which is in Westchester County. I was driven across county lines 40 minutes away to the town of Brewster, which is in Putnam County. So that meant that I didn't know where I was. I couldn't leave on my own. Because it was a school day, my parents thought that I was in high school, so they didn't call around looking for me. I had no attorney present. There were 3 officers present who I knew were cops from Peekskill, but then there was also Putnam County Sheriff's Investigator Daniel Stevens, who was dressed as a civilian. He was a polygraphist, and he was pretending not to be a cop, so I never knew that he was a police officer. He never read me my rights. So after giving me this manual to read about how the polygraph worked, which contained a lot of big words beyond my comprehension, they put me into a small room. And he gave me countless cups of coffee, which seems fairly clear that the purpose of giving me the coffee was to make me nervous, so that I could flunk the polygraph, because the premise of the polygraph is that if you tell a lie, then you'll become nervous, and the nervousness will result in an increased pulse rate, and it's the pulse rate which is actually measured by the machine. So after giving me 6 or 7 cups of coffee, I'm then strapped to this polygraph machine, and that's when he launched into his third-degree tactics. So he raised his voice at me, He invaded my personal space. He kept asking me the same questions over and over again. As each hour passed by, my fear increased in proportion to the time. He kept that routine up for like 6.5 to 7 hours. Towards the end of the interrogation, he said, I guess he was exasperated because he did everything but get me to falsely confess, so it's time to utilize the polygraph. So he says, what do you mean you didn't do it? You just told me through the polygraph result that you did. We just want you to verbally confirm it. So when he said that to me, it really shot my fear through the roof. And it was at that point that the officer from the Peekskill Police Department, the one who had been pretending to be my friend, whereas his partner was the bad cop. So they do the good cop, bad cop routines that when the person being questioned, you look to that friendly face for assistance. So Stevens mentions the polygraph result to me. That gets me more frightened. And then the officer comes in the room who had previously been pretending to be my friend. And he told me that the other officers were going to harm me, but that he was holding them off, but that he couldn't do so indefinitely, that I had to help myself. So considering that I had maintained my innocence for that previous 6.5 to 7 hours, it was clear what he meant by that, that they wanted me to confess. When he added that if I did as they wanted, not only would they stop what they were doing, but that I could go home afterwards, that I was not going to be arrested. So being totally overwhelmed emotionally and psychologically, and really being in fear of my life. I mean, the fact that I didn't know where I was and that I knew no one else knew where I was, that really loomed rather large in my mind. And then there was the push-pull dynamic. On the one hand, the threat of harm, and then this false life preserver that he had just thrown me. So the cumulative effect of that was that I falsely confessed. I made up a story based upon information which they had given me in the course of that interrogation and in the 6 weeks prior to that, when they would periodically meet with me, and half the time they would talk to me as if I was a suspect, and the other half the time they would be talking to me pretending to need my help to solve the crime. So in the course of that routine, that's what the run-up to the day of the false confession was. In fact, that's how they got me to agree to take the polygraph. They told me, well, we have some new information in the police file. We want to share that with you, and then that's going to put you in better position to help us. So just help us to help you to help us. So getting back to the false confession here is that the details that they had given me is how I was able to craft the story. And by the time it was all said and done, I was on the floor, I was curled up in a fetal position, I was crying uncontrollably. I was so frightened out of my mind, I was speaking faster than what I could craft in terms of the story. So needless to say, I was arrested. I was charged with murder and rape. The prosecutorial misconduct and the fraud of the medical examiners is important to understand in brief, because the prosecutor got the medical examiner to commit fraud, to come into court and claim that he found medical evidence showing that the victim had been sexually active, which is what opened the door for the prosecutor to falsely claim that it didn't matter that the DNA didn't come from me because she might have had sex with somebody else voluntarily. And at the same time, my public defender was terrible. I mean, he never cross-examined the medical examiner. He never explained to the jury what the significance of the DNA matching me was. He never argued that proved that the confession was coerced and false. He never presented to the jury my alibi. I was actually playing wiffle ball at the time that the crime happened. So the sum total of everything was that I was wrongfully convicted, and I spent the 16 years in prison. I mean, I lost 7 appeals. In fact, one of the highlights or lowlights, however you want to dress up the description, the appellate division, when I went to the first appeal, I mean, the appellate division wrote in their opinion that there was overwhelming evidence of guilt, which I don't quite understand that ruling really to this day. The DNA was in my behalf, and the only other evidence was this confession obtained under highly questionable circumstances. So from there, I also got turned down for parole, I think in part because I stood on my innocence rather than expressing remorse and taking responsibility, and in every other way, I was really kind of an ideal candidate, considering my disciplinary record and the educational accomplishments I did while I was in prison. Ultimately, I obtained the assistance of the Innocence Project, and they agreed to represent me. As Mark mentioned, Pirro left office, DiFiore took office, and I think really what happened was Barry Scheck was really the bigger public figure at that point in DiFiore's career, and so she allowed me to have the further testing, and so it matched the actual perpetrator, who was subsequently arrested and convicted. I mean, not only did he confess to the authorities, but he also confessed to a reporter on video camera. So, definitely no false confession or coercion there, to be clear. So when I was released, I gave an off-the-cuff 2.5 hour presentation to the media, really saying everything I had ever wanted to say in the course of the 16 years, and really could never get anybody to hear. And so it was at that moment that, a light switch went off in my head, and I realized, I could be part of the innocence movement without necessarily being a lawyer. And so I found a mission in life. I found a purpose. I found a silver lining. I felt like, it's my job I'm here in the world, and that's how I make sense of what happened to me. It's up to me to fight the wrongful convictions and to be part of that effort. And so I embarked on this advocacy trail, with my newfound identity, from doing presentations to being a columnist for a weekly paper for 5 years, to trading privacy in exchange for awareness, and doing media interviews and meeting with elected officials and going to hearings. And simultaneous to that, at the same time that I was doing that, I got a really generous offer from Mercy College to finish my college degree. I had gotten the GED in prison and got the associates, and was 30 credits short, which is to say 10 classes short of getting the bachelor's degree, but they're giving me the scholarship. And so I finished the bachelor's degree, which I never would have done, because I rather foolishly was thinking at the time, I'm too old to go to college. So that intervention was really, I look at that as a key moment in my life post-exoneration. So I got the bachelor's degree, and from there I got the master's from John Jay, with my thesis written on wrongful conviction causes. And at the same time, I was pursuing the litigation and seeking to hold people accountable to the extent that I could. I mean, really, people should have went to prison for really what was done, but the most justice I ever got was on the civil side. And so, I wanted, when I got the money, I wanted to take the advocacy work to the next level. I wanted to do things I could never do as an individual. I wanted to be involved in reaching back for people. I was tired of just doing the awareness and the policy. I wanted to actually help free people, and so I committed a few $1 million of the money, to start the organization, which Mark mentioned the name of, and it's been a really nice run. We've been around for 4.5 years. So we exonerated 2 people in the 4 years. We exonerated William Lopez, who was in for 23.5 years on a shotgun murder out of Brooklyn. He had pre-existing lawyers that were with him for about 9 years, but they needed us on the investigatory level. So it's kind of like a building was built, but it was missing a section, and so we helped to put that section in, finding some additional evidence, and he was exonerated. Kind of like how Mark mentioned in his the story of his first exoneration, where he took comfort in that his client was free for a year. So similar thing with Lopez. He lived for like 1.5 years afterwards. But we went, but I think that was really the best 1.5 years of his life. And then not long ago, maybe like 6 months ago, another Putnam County case, foundation, we helped to exonerate William Hawley, who was also from Putnam County, who was in for an arson case that actually really was like an electrical fire. In order to undo a wrongful conviction case, you have to find something new. I mean, you might assess the record yourself in terms of, making an educated guess, do you believe in someone's innocence or not? But that's really what motivates you to go forward on the case. You can't go back in a court and relitigate what is already there, so you really have to find something new. And so in 3 instances, we were really, the record was fairly clear that our clients were innocent, but we didn't have anything new, and so they were making a parole board appearance, and so we wrote letters to the parole board outlining the primary and secondary reasons why we believed that they were innocent, and it carried the day. We're like 3 for 5 on those, and so 3 other people were out, albeit not exonerated. Our goal is still to clear them, but at least they have some measure of freedom while we still look for other ways to try to get enough evidence to clear them. The organization, we were able to do the work that we did really because I wrote a large check every month is what it amounted to, and so I did that for like 3.5 to 4 years. I rather naively thought that I could just have a program, just have the programmatic side, just have the legal professionals to do the work, and I could do the advocacy stuff, and I would just meet with donors, and, since it's my name on the door, and no money's coming to me, but to the contrary, money went out, who could question our authenticity, and so I thought that, people would I'd meet with potential donors, they'd write checks, and, we would keep going. But after doing that for, 3.5 years, we really, our fundraising efforts didn't go well, and so we reached to the point where, we had to just convert to, just having a volunteer staff, and we still have the staff attorney finishing up a few of the cases that we were close on, but beyond that, we have other people doing the volunteer work, and fortunately, really for us, 4 different law firms have stepped forward with some others potentially on the way where cases that we screen and pitch to them, they'll consider taking on a pro bono basis, and through which the foundation would remain involved on a strategic and consultative level, and then chip in with some timely PR work when the moment's right. So, really, what I'm hoping, what I hope, I remember, I remember talking with some people and discussing, the difficulty in raising funds, and, there's a website called Patreon, which, we have a modest campaign there, and, my crazy idea, right, my dream. So it's great to have the volunteers and have the lawyers, and you need that, because this is very labor intensive, but you also, to really be robust, right? You really need to have, in-house staff. So, my crazy idea was to have, what if there were 25,000 people who could afford $3, on a recurring basis? I mean, to then have investigators and lawyers and other relevant staff, and to, maybe one day, have a few large donors. So I still retain that dream that I carry around with me. We have like 600 raw cases, unscreened. People have been waiting, 2, 3, 4 years just for us to vet the case and determine, do we believe in their innocence claim? Is it at least plausible what they're saying? Is there a path forward to try to exonerate them? So I think about a lot of those cases. I think about those cases at night. Some of the people that the foundation's, still working with. So one of our clients actually is, here tonight. Wayne Drummond is here, and we're still working on exonerating him. But he's home on parole, but he's not content with being home on parole. He wants to have his name cleared as well. He should. Other people really who are here. Mark talked about Anthony's story, and Anthony talked about his story. But a name that came up, a few times in the course of the story was Krivak. They mentioned the name Krivak a few times. So Andy Krivak really is Anthony's co-defendant. The same polygraphist, Daniel Stevens, who did what he did to me with the polygraph and using that as a coercion vehicle, did the same thing to Andy Krivak. The prosecution theory was that, they did the crime together. Anthony's home. Andy is still in prison. That doesn't make sense when you're claiming that they did the crime together. Andy's post-conviction motion requested a new trial, in part based on the newly discovered evidence that was not available at the time of trial, that Daniel Stevens, who did what he did to me, did that to Andy, so he couldn't bring that in to challenge him about what he did to me in order to show, look, you've done this type of thing before. So as far as, we're concerned, we thought that was a really solid ground. And then also all the evidence as against Howard Gombert. I mean, just like Anthony was able to get a new trial and, have the right to present that, I mean, that was our argument, was that he should have, Andy should have the same right to present that same evidence. So part of the way that the court evaluates that is, whether they evaluate whether or not the new evidence would probably have changed the outcome. Well, we thought we had a great argument in and of itself. But when Anthony was acquitted, that's proof positive that yes, in fact, there would have been a different outcome. And so we kind of thought this was kind of went without saying that he was going to get the conviction overturned. But when the judge issued his opinion, the same judge as Anthony had in his trial, the judge went back to a 1981 treatise in which it referenced, that to paraphrase, that a confession is the most reliable type of evidence you have, right? Let's just forget about through DNA evidence showing that false confessions have been the cause of wrongful convictions in 25% of the cases. Right, being, rather unreliable form of evidence. He wrote in his opinion, I couldn't believe it, that he thought that was the most reliable form of evidence. And then he made short shrift of all the evidence as against Gombert. He said basically, well, all this evidence against Gombert really, that wouldn't have done anything at all compared to the confession and compared to the corroboration of the confession. What's the corroboration? Well, corroboration is, well, in the confession it contains details, right, supposedly that only the killer would know. But we know through the DNA cases, in my cases, and other cases, that often, although that's the claim, what happens is in the course of the interrogation, either deliberately or inadvertently, the details are conveyed, to people who then parrot it and incorporate that into their statements. And so, the new trial motion was denied. So we're obviously appealing that, and not just on the fighting in the legal arena with the appeal, but also on the public relational aspect. We were able to pitch the case successfully to Victor Sipos, an attorney who's handling the case pro bono, and he also brought in Adele Bernard, who had represented Andy Krivak at an earlier stage of the case prior to him coming to us. So we're challenging that, but we're also fighting fairly aggressively in the public relational arena. We all feel very strong, that Andy has just as much right to his freedom, as Anthony has. It's kind of a travesty that they're both, that he's still in, Anthony's out. So I'm going to close out with this. I'm often asked, what is the percentage, Jeff? What do you think the percentage of wrongfully convicted prisoners are across the country? And because I know that the answer I give is going to be met with skepticism, I always, before saying it, I support it with all of my reasons. And so I'm going to style my answer to you tonight in that fashion. So 13 people that I knew and did time with while I was incarcerated were exonerated either before me or after me in the course of my 16 years. In Brooklyn, when there was a new district attorney elected, Ken Thompson, who had replaced the prior DA who had been there for 23 and a half years. He beat the incumbent in a primary in a race that was really decided in large part on the wrongful convictions. So the new DA running on the wrongful conviction issue set up a unit, a conviction review unit, and in the 2.5 years, 23 people were exonerated. And it's like they would have never saw the light of day had the incumbent stayed there, and there's no reason to believe that was limited only to that one jurisdiction. A lot of the other areas where the incumbents have been there for a long time, who knows how many more people are still in prison there, but unable to be heard. Last year, it was 149 people were exonerated nationally on a DNA basis, 139 the year before that, and the 2 years before that it was 91 people. The National Registry of Exonerations, which tracks all the exonerations, both DNA and non-DNA. They're around 2,000. I don't have the exact number memorized. I did at one time, but I've forgot. But you can look it up, but it's close to that number. And that's really the people that make it out, though. I believe it's kind of like the iceberg. So what you see above the surface is just a small part of the whole. And then when you think about how for many years, what was accepted as evidence in the courtroom that had an air of being scientific, but actually wasn't scientific, that's been admitted as evidence, whether we're talking about tire tracks, footprints, bite marks, voice recognition, bullet lead analysis, where we're going to pretend that we test the bullets for the chemical composition and be able to determine where the bullets were made and trace where the bullets were sold to my favorite, which would be laughable. It would be great Saturday Night Live material, except that people were wrongfully convicted based on it. Dog scent testimony. Right? I kid you not. You did hear me correct, okay? I said dog scent testimony, where we're going to give an item to the dog and he's going to smell it, and and then he's going to be given something from the defendant, and if the dog barks, then that meant that he recognized the smell. When you think about all these things used as evidence, I think that the percentage of wrongfully convicted people is 15 to 20%. So that's why I do the work. That's why the foundation has the mission that it does, and that's why I'm in law school. I'm hoping to exonerate some people personally, not just through the foundation. And listen, thanks so much for hosting and coming out to this event.
Just another quick round of applause for our speakers. This was a really incredible night. I want to thank each of our speakers. There's a lot of darkness in the criminal justice system that we've heard about, that we know about outside of here, and each one of you in your own ways represents a light. Jeff, the work you're doing is so inspiring, and you are showing us that sometimes you have to do the work yourself if you want it done right, and thank you so much for being that voice, for being that movement. You're an amazing person, and we're so lucky to have you here with us tonight. Anthony, you stood up here with a huge smile on your face and your positivity and your eye towards the future. It's really nothing short of inspiring, and we're really lucky and honored to have you here with us tonight as well. And Mark, thank you so much for agreeing to speak tonight. You're a real hero that sits amongst us here in Shul. We're so lucky to have you as part of our community, and it's inspiring for us to hear about the work you do. We see you here on Shabbos, but to actually hear about the work you're doing from you, it's been incredible. Thank you so much for being an inspiration for us to stand up for what's right and put your whole heart into things. Thank you. Because the hour is late, we don't have time for questions, but Mark's going to stick around for some questions. And if Jeff, Anthony, if you want to stick around as well, feel free to go up. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a good night.